So, the idea of fantasy sports as a whole and how it started and how the kinds of monies, not only that you would make by providing a league and a service, but for those that actually make the kind of money that you can from DraftKings. It is an interesting story and at times a controversial one. Matt Kalish, co-founder of DraftKings, going to join us after we have a little listen to him, ironically talking about, that's right, the U.S. Open, which starts like in a matter of
a day.
Matter of a day.
Open was a huge event for us. I think what we've learned this year is that golf majors rival any major event in sport. You know, NFL weeks, playoffs, anything, and the demand that we saw and the engagement from players was phenomenal. We had a tournament that was $20 per entry that we filled over 140,000 seats and awarded $1 million to someone new who I think was pretty happy to see Dustin Johnson push that final putt a little bit to the left. And, you know, it was a great experience, I think, for DraftKings, for all of the players to be able to watch the U.S. Open, a major event, and for 4 days just enjoy that experience and the sweat of down to the wire, you know, seeing what would happen in the tournament. Hey, there's a lot of overlap between people who like poker due to the competitiveness and strategy and skill element and daily fantasy. We knew that we had to do something with WSOP, and I think the first thing we did is we did a patch deal with Greg Merson when he won the main event in 2012, I think it was. And then for the last 2 years, we've done a WSOP sponsorship that's been, you know, gradually deepening and escalating, and we love the partnership. It's something that drives a lot of value for us, and I hope that we're giving a lot back too in terms of qualifying in about 50 players from DraftKings to the main event. Today in the DraftKings 50-50, we qualified in several people, and just kind of adding to the liquidity and the overall action in the WSOP is something that we're definitely looking to do. DraftKings has been around for about 3 years now, so still pretty new, and I think what we've been able to do in that 3 years is launch 10 different sports and try to make them all really good and improve where, you know, we thought we had gaps over time, and we're definitely not going to stop at 10. We're going to have...
Well, improved, I'm sure they have. I think as Matt Kalish has joined us here in our studio here at rawmikeRichards.com, that interview is probably, what is that, a couple years old, I would say, probably?
Yeah, it's 2 years ago, almost exactly now, so yeah.
So when you look at the things that you were saying 2 years ago, because DraftKings is something that, you know, on a month-by-month basis, if, you know, you're going back 2 years, the changes that you think that you have not only gone through, but implemented, it's pretty significant in 2 years, past 2 years.
We've made a ton of progress, changes. A number of different areas of the business look a lot different now than they did 2 years ago. Certainly, you know, our company's up to 320 people now, so we've been able to do a lot and have an amazing technology, product team, marketing team that's come together over the last couple of years and really, I think, added a lot for our players.
Matt, when you go back and you take a look at, and again, sort of the genesis of where this comes from, and I'll go back to sort of it being in sports radio pretty much my entire career. When people start talking about fantasy sports, and I'm listening to it, I'm like, so you're going to build these teams, you're like a pretend general manager. And then what happens? Well, we have these parties at the end of the year. You get rings, you get a jacket. So you don't get anything. You just do it for the enjoyment of that. Yeah, I'm like, well, what kind of legs could this possibly have? Well, apparently that's a lot of legs because you're taking a look at something that dominates conversations from almost adolescent boys to men of all ages. So at that point for you in 2000 and, well, I know 2012, but before that, why do you think at some point you were able to monetize this idea and make it the giant that it is today?
Well, I think the existing season-long fantasy sports companies monetize really well. I'd say better than us even in some ways with, you know, if you look at an ESPN or Yahoo in the States, they just have a different revenue model. They're doing free games that are all supported by advertisers and sponsors, and they have millions of players who come on and participate in those leagues, and I think that's one way to approach it. What DraftKings has done has been much more focused, I think, on just creating a really great ecosystem for players to come on and compete and do that more rapidly, more fluidly, I think, than you can do in a season-long league. Like if you think about the season-long experience, you come on at the start. If you don't sign up, you can't play. It's not like you can join halfway through the year.
Yeah.
And you have a very static group of friends you're playing against. You have a static team. You can't really change that much. Our game is much different. I mean, you come on, you can play every week if you want. You can take weeks off if you're traveling. You build new teams every single week. You change who you're playing against. All the different setup of the league can be customized or changed every single week. So it's a much more dynamic, I think, way of playing the game, and the more serious of a fan you are, I think the more that you really appreciate and embrace all of the different dials that you can turn when you're playing daily fantasy.
I was going to say you also get the more serious stat fan on the daily level, because you kind of talk about the season long thing. Well, you've played in these before. If you have a league of 12 teams, if 6 of them are out of the playoff situation by mid-season, you don't even set lineups even more. You kind of just forget about it. Now with you guys, if you lose on Monday, you try again on Tuesday, and you go for it on Wednesday, and you have the opportunity on the weekend. So it's almost you give the fan itself a daily opportunity at 10 different sports, and I think that's what kind of drives people like me per se than the guy that's going to sit there and say, okay, well, we'll see what happens in December when the season's over.
Yeah, I think our players are very competitive. You have people who want to get in there and figure out a game that's not easily mastered, and I think nobody reasonable expects that you're going to come on and the first time you ever look at it, you totally understand the best way to construct a roster or the best way to value the players. And it takes a little bit of time. You digest the game and try to learn, over the course of a couple of weeks or months while you're playing, and learn where, you could have done something differently that you would have performed better. And there's a really amazing, I think, community around daily fantasy sports. There's a ton of content, Twitter, forums, articles that get written that help new players come in and learn the ins and outs of how to think about building teams. And anytime there's a new season, like with the CFL starting up, there's a ton of articles as well that get written about just how to think about the season that's coming up, the best way to build rosters in that specific sport. And I think our players really, deepen their engagement with the sport as a result. Like they become almost obsessed with just trying to learn, every player, all the injuries, what's going on. And, I'd say it's a much more heightened version of what you'd see with season long, for sure.
We're in conversation with Matt Kalish here on rawmikeRichards.com talking about DraftKings. And, of course, you just mentioned the CFL and the deal you have with them. And we're both CFL guys, and we've both worked out west and have been fans forever. And, of course, we're always told within our own country that having some sort of fantasy involvement would never happen. I mean, it would, there's a pushback because of some of the feelings that people have about the Canadian Football League that, quite frankly, Dave and I obviously don't have, and I think most of the nation might, outside of Toronto, might argue that. So I'm just wondering, in approaching the Canadian Football League, doing sort of your due diligence, what leads you down that road to make this actually happen? Or do red flags go up and say, well, maybe this is not going to be a fit for what we do?
No, I think so. First of all, leagues, teams, and athletes love DraftKings, and the reason why they love DraftKings is because of the amount of engagement that we drive. Like, this is actually our second season doing a partnership with CFL. Last year, we announced it in the same week. The CFL ratings were up 10%, and we have 7.5 million fantasy players on our platform that we're promoting this game to. So these are people that are just looking for something. In a lot of the case, it would be like an American person who there's no NFL right now going on, but they love football and they realize that we launched CFL, so they want to try it. Or it's, a Canadian player who just was waiting for us to launch it and we didn't have it before, and now they're finally checking back in to, see how the game works. So the ratings went up 10% immediately for the whole season. I think the millennial audience was up almost 10%. Females were up, almost 10%. Mm-hmm. So it was really, I think, a strong initial result, and that's why leagues and teams and players love us. We just increase the engagement in the content itself and the awareness of the athletes and the teams.
Do you also think it's also, you just mentioned sort of some of the demographic, it also probably is very attractive to them in terms of the younger demographic that this kind of brings?
Yeah, we definitely skew towards that sort of younger audience, no question. And I think our sweet spot is 18 to 49. We have a very, very strong engagement and adoption with that range. And it's an audience I think a lot of sports leagues want to reach better. Some are doing better than others. Like the NBA, for example, I think is doing a great job reaching the younger audience in the U.S. and in Canada. And there's some other leagues that feel like, fantasy could help them a lot. Like the PGA, I think, sees a lot of value in, the fantasy engagement that they're seeing. And, the leagues that tend to have the slightly older audiences, I think, are really trying to tap into fantasy right now.
What kind of audiences are you getting? You kind of touched on a little bit with the American, football fan that wants to see what's going on CFL wise because there's nothing in the States. But, you have clients in Europe and the UK, big population out there that loves DraftKings. Are you seeing those continents watching or wanting to see what's going on in the CFL at all? Do you guys have numbers on that there is an attraction that now that you guys are on board, other parts of the world are now interested in a CFL product?
That's part of what we offer to the CFL when we're talking about the deal. Like you asked, what do we do when we go and talk to them? Certainly it's the idea of increasing the fan experience for people who are already fans of the CFL and making that better, like helping those fans get closer to the game every week. But we also have this massive audience of people that love football, but it's the National Football League in the States, and that's in the off season right now. So we can go to them and say, we have 6-7 million people playing National Football League fantasy. We think we can cross a ton of them over to start following Canadian Football League. And in the first season, I think we saw some really nice results on that, enough clearly that they and us both wanted to renew the relationship this year. And it's going to be our focus this year as well, just trying to continue to increase the adoption, the amount of people that are following the Canadian Football League.
Well, I also think too that the model itself is a reflection of younger people and how they live their lives. So, for instance, instead of spending all that time on a league that goes, the 18 weeks or whatever you put into it, now there's instant reward, which is kind of how we all live our lives on the phone. I mean, it's just a reflection of that. It's also, I think, in terms of the things that say, let's say, under the age of 25 that they find engaging. So that's why I think even, when poker started to take off, when all those things, like the demographics were much younger than what we would normally associate with that. So that's why when I kind of take a look at, NCAA sports, the old guard that runs that, do they have a difficulty with actually understanding that the youth that makes that live? Is there a disconnect there when it comes to something like this? Or is the NCAA just fine with being a part of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think every league has their own unique, people and ways of looking at questions like that. And, I think what we've tried to do is really educate all of the relevant kind of commissioners, league stakeholders, team owners, like as many people as anybody who will hear us out, basically. We want to sit down and share the impact that fantasy has had on engagement in the sport and the league and what it means to the fans that are watching. It's actually, for a lot of people, I think, become almost boring to watch sports unless you're playing fantasy. Unless
there's action on it of some kind.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm sure it hasn't always been that way, but over the last 20, 30 years, as fantasy has really built up, and especially since daily fantasy in the last 5-7 years, it's become so important to fans. I just don't think sports exists quite the same way without fantasy anymore. And so we've been trying to really share a lot of that engagement data, just show, fans are watching 60% more games than they would if they weren't playing fantasy when they have teams. They're reading all of the content leading up to each week, all of the different injury news, this and that. They're checking into all of the programming, and that wasn't happening before. You had a lot of home team fans. If you're in Toronto, you're following the local teams. If you're in Boston, Mass, you're following the local teams, but you're not following the whole league, all of the teams, all of the sort of things going on. So I think that's really the difference between fantasy players and not, that we want to educate all of the league owners about, and that's what really helps get them, I think, in our court.
You're a Boston guy. What is your team? Do you like just the Celtics, Patriots, Bruins, or are you more of one sport than the other? What's your, if you're not around us and you're not at the office, what are you watching at home tonight if you have a variety of opportunity to watch something on TV?
Yeah, so right now I've been following certainly the Red Sox, but also I watch a lot of UFC and golf in the off season.
Yeah.
But I would say favorite sports definitely, National Football League with the Patriots, and the ownership of the Patriots is actually invested in DraftKings, and they've been a huge help to us. So we're very loyal to the Patriots. You
like them even more, right?
Yeah. Whenever somebody's talking bad about the team, we're always right behind them. We have their back. So. The Kraft family has been amazing supporters of DraftKings, and I think people that we've really, really benefited from being close with.
So, and I just find it very interesting that in talking to people in the gaming world, for instance, that Canadians love action on MMA and UFC. They just love it. What's the kind of movement that you have within DraftKings on those kinds of sports? Do you find that as a growth sport?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think NASCAR in the U.S., MMA globally, a bunch of sports really needed a good fantasy game that fans could play alongside watching. And it's going to be, something that people tune into passively either way on some level, but the fantasy experience is much deeper. It really makes you want to watch the whole
absolutely,
the whole game. And there was really no great UFC fantasy games. There was no great auto racing fantasy games for a while. DraftKings really created those and tried to drive that initial burst of engagement, and I think we've been thrilled with the kind of engagement that we've seen. I would actually say PGA with the U.S. Open coming up is another great example. We have hundreds of thousands of people who play these fantasy leagues for the Masters and for U.S. Open. And prior to DraftKings, there was really nothing that big. I mean, people would do office pools or different little things.
Pieces of paper, right?
But there was no way that you could go online and play a U.S. Open fantasy league before DraftKings built that. And we were kind of stunned, I think, in some ways that hundreds of thousands of people started showing up and playing. But it makes a lot of sense. It's way more fun to watch when you're playing.
No, exactly. So what's next for you guys? You guys just closed another year of the CFL. That's year number 2 for you guys. Is there anything else coming up on the horizon, or do you kind of just sit back and just keep on growing within the company?
Yeah, we have a few different things that we're working on at this stage. I think continuing to deepen the league relationships is really important. So the partnership with CFL, being able to renew that and continue to grow the adoption of that game is really important. From an international standpoint, right now we operate in U.S., Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, and what we're really hoping to do is add some more countries to that in the next year. We really see the opportunity as being global. The sports might change, and the specific way that you market or operate might change. But sports fans are pretty much the same people no matter where you go. They just want a way to play alongside and participate. So international is definitely a big one. And then the last area I would mention is on the content side. We've been very focused on making sure that there's an amazing sort of live second screen content experience that we can provide for our players. We launched something called DraftKings Live, DK Live. It's an app that you can get in the store that it's basically a live scoring news notes app that tracks all of the fantasy scoring alongside the actual in-game scoring. And that's something that we thought was a great companion for any fantasy player, much better than just using a standard scoring app. So we've been putting a big team on that.
And that comes with the app, right, itself? Because there is a live button with the DraftKings app.
Yep. So it's a separate app that's integrated.
I gotcha. Okay.
So if you're watching the scoring for a team that you built on DraftKings, you can launch DK Live from that scoring screen, and it gives you the much more detail of the play-by-play of the games.
Gotcha.
You can click through to different games.
Okay, I've seen that.
Are going
I've seen
on.
the advertisement for that. Okay, I understand. Now, you talked about expanding into maybe more countries in Europe, and you talked about you're big in the UK, which is really no surprise considering how big of a sports gambling, a sports daily fantasy sports population that is. Germany. What does it take to get into some of these other countries? Like, say, if you were to talk about getting into the Czech Republic or Spain or Italy, what does it take from a company's point of view to try to penetrate that market and get acceptance into it? What do you guys have to do to make that happen?
We have a team in place that sort of runs all around the world trying to better understand those questions. Every country's different. So
yeah, because I was going to say that must be a different it's not the same puzzle everywhere you go.
Yeah, I think what's good for the players is no matter where you are, you have the same protections in place. Like in the U.S., and in the UK, there's regulations on this sort of game that are meant to protect consumer experience, make sure, for example, like money that you deposit is kept safe, that there's certain protections around like who you play against, how much information you have against your opponents in the game, things like that, entry limits in the games, things like that. And those have been vetted by, a bunch of states like Massachusetts, New York, the UK, like a ton of different entities have looked at and made decisions about how that should work in our space. And we apply that to everyone. Like there's not in the same way a specific regulation in Canada, but we still apply the US and UK standard in Canada, even though we don't have to, just because we think there should be a standard, way that companies operate in this space. So we'll continue to apply that anywhere we go. I think it gives us a good start when you're talking to a regulator in, like, for your example, Czech Republic or something.
Yeah.
You can say, we already have all these protections in place. It's safe to play, for consumers. And we have 8 million users who love the game.
That's
we get
incredible.
Amazing feedback. So I think that's a really great starting point when you're talking to somebody that's maybe not as familiar with what we do and trying to educate them.
Correct.
So are you like the most popular guy in your neighborhood when you go back to Boston? Are you getting free Sam Adams? Are you, like, what's happening for you? Because I got to be thinking people should be worshiping what you have done for people, and then there's got to be the family side where they go, what does Matt do for a living? What is little Matty doing? How does your family even explain like 6 years ago what was going through your head? How did they even explain that?
Anytime you start something new, you have no idea if it's going to work. So it's just a risk, like pretty pure risk. And I was lucky to be around a lot of people that were very supportive of that. Like my family knows me pretty well and understood that I'm that kind of DNA where I'm going to not be too complacent with, just working in corporate America forever. So,
were you a numbers guy? Are you on that side of the world?
Yeah,
what was schooling for you? What was schooling for you?
So in school, I was computer science and economics, and then most of my career was in analytics, actually. So I was always a numbers guy, and on the side, I was also very competitive with basically everything. Like I was a college athlete. I did all of our company, softball leagues and all of this. Anything that you could compete at was fun. But also on the more brainy side, I would play chess, card games, like anything that I could get my hands on that was competitive and not easily mastered. I always liked. And fantasy is a great example of that. My two partners I started DraftKings with, we played a bunch of season-long, baseball, football leagues together, and started talking about this business in 2011 when, we were just looking for an out, I think, of corporate America, trying to come up with something. So this idea we started working on, and very fortunate, I think, that it got so popular.
You talk about your co-founder, your partners, your co-founder, your friends, basically. How long have you known Jason and Paul for?
So I've known Jason pretty much since I graduated school in 2004. So over 10 years. And then Paul, a little less, but not much, like maybe 7 years. And we knew that we would work well together. It was fine. Like we had worked in corporate America for many years and knew each other really well and had great working relationships. And you kind of have to when you're doing something like DraftKings.
Oh yeah, absolutely you do.
I don't think we could have gotten through all the things that we did in the last 5 years. It's tough doing a startup, and if you don't have a great relationship, things kind of crack and break down. So the fact that we're still all working together, I think, is the proof.
Could you have been that successful if you still had that Selfie accent that everyone tries to imitate and does it really badly? Would that still have worked out okay for
I
you?
think people think you're a little less of your I'm just kidding. No, I've been around Boston my whole life, so that's like my world in a way, and there's definitely a lot of the
because you don't have that thick accent at all.
If you're drinking,
that's right. See, outside of Boston, Gary Goldman, I didn't even know it's from Boston. Because his brother calls him Gah. Yeah, he goes, I don't talk like that. I don't have that thing going on. He said, well, there are people who actually don't sound like a Wahlberg or something. Yeah. But very popular.
They do exist.
Yeah, they do exist. Well, Matt, thanks so much for coming in and joining us on the show. We're pretty new ourselves. We're only like a month and a half into this.
Too, exactly.
Awesome. So we've had a massive following from coast to coast, and just the way that we found in terrestrial radio that was literally and is shriveling up and dying, that we had to find a way in a medium that, this is certainly not new, but the way that we approach it, we have a 3-shot. We were on remote yesterday with a with a team that actually you know, so we can sit down and talk to the players and get stuff, you know, sort of up close and personal, you know, so guys like yourself, when you can come in, you know, we're actually delivering something that I know that they use, and there's no parameters. I'm not owned by a big you know, corporation that has certain feelings about certain sports and the way that you handle it. We have none of that. So that's one of the reasons why we did this too. So we just we think it's great that we now have the chance to talk to someone like yourself, because I think the story's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you gotta be able to sort of adapt and survive, and things are always going to change. You can't stop the, you know, direction that things go. And I think, you know, it really just comes down to, can you figure out what's going on in the world and adapt and figure out what's next. So,
And you're having fun, obviously. You're having fun.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't trade my job for anyone.
Thanks so much for coming in, Matt. That is Matt Kalish joining us here today in studio, rawmkerichards.com.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yep.